The soft hum of chatter and clinking glasses filled the air as the Manhattan skyline glittered outside the grand ballroom of the Monarch Hotel. Among the crowd of polished elites, Naomi Carter, a rising star in interior design, sipped her champagne quietly. Her eyes wandered over the room, analyzing the elegant layout with the keen eye of someone who lived to transform spaces into something magical. For Naomi, events like this were more about inspiration than indulgence. She thrived on creativity and discipline, her designs adorning some of the most exclusive properties in the city. Tonight, though, felt different. Like the universe had more in store for her than just networking. Across the room, Ethan Blake, a renowned tech engineer and CEO of a cutting-edge AI company, stood at the bar. With his sharp suit and commanding presence, he appeared every bit the master of his domain. Yet his gaze wasn't on the champagne or the skyline, it had landed on Naomi. Unaware of the attention, Naomi tucked a strand of dark hair behind her ear, her mind focused on the challenges of her latest project. But when their eyes met, briefly but powerfully, it was as if the bustling room faded, leaving only a charged silence that neither could ignore. Neither of them could know that this seemingly fleeting encounter would alter the course of their lives forever. The crystal chandeliers sparkled above, casting a warm glow over the elegant ballroom as Naomi made her way to the bar. She wasn't here to make small talk or network. The event was just another professional obligation in her busy life as an interior designer. Still, the champagne in her hand was a welcome escape after a long week. "Is it just me, or does this place try a little too hard to impress?" a deep voice quipped beside her. Startled, Naomi turned to find a man with sharp features and an easy confidence. He was dressed in a perfectly tailored suit, his presence somehow blending into the opulence while commanding attention. "It's all about the lighting," she replied, unable to resist engaging. "Soft shadows and just enough sparkle to hide the imperfections." "That sounds like the voice of experience." His smile was disarming, his dark eyes glinting with intrigue. "Let me guess, you're in design?" "Interior design," she admitted, taking a sip of her drink. "And you?" "Tech," he replied simply, raising his glass. "Ethan." "Naomi." They didn't exchange more details, yet the conversation flowed easily, full of playful banter and lighthearted observations about the evening's guests. As the minutes slipped by, Naomi found herself laughing more freely than she had in ages. Ethan's wit and charm made her forget the rigid plans and goals that usually consumed her thoughts. "You have a way of making this place feel less," Naomi gestured vaguely, "pretentious." "And you've made it feel far more interesting," Ethan countered, the corners of his mouth lifting into a crooked smile. They shared another drink and then another, the air between them growing warmer, charged with an undeniable pull. Naomi couldn't recall the last time she'd felt so at ease with a stranger, or so drawn to one. When Ethan leaned in slightly, his voice low and teasing, "How much longer are you going to pretend you're not as curious as I am about where this night could go?" His words sent a shiver down Naomi's spine, the kind that whispered of possibilities too tempting to ignore. She didn't answer with words. Instead, her hand brushed his, a fleeting but intentional gesture that set the course for the rest of the evening. By the time they left the ballroom together, the city's lights stretched endlessly before them, a backdrop to a decision that would forever alter their lives. Naomi woke to the soft glow of dawn filtering through the sheer curtains of an unfamiliar penthouse bedroom. Her mind was a haze of fleeting memories, sparkling champagne, Ethan's laughter, the feeling of his lips against hers. The events of the night came rushing back, the drinks, the conversation, and the magnetic pull that had led her here. Turning her head, she saw Ethan asleep beside her, his features softened by the early morning light. His arm rested casually across the bed, his presence oddly reassuring. For a brief moment, Naomi allowed herself to savor the unexpected intimacy of the night. But reality soon crept in. This wasn't her. She wasn't the kind of woman who spent the night with a stranger, no matter how charming or disarming he might be. Quietly slipping out of bed, Naomi gathered her dress and shoes, dressing quickly in the luxurious bathroom. By the time she reached the penthouse door, she hadn't left a note. There didn't seem to be anything to say. In the days that followed, Naomi tried to bury herself in work, designing spaces that mirrored the control she desperately sought to regain. But something was different. Her usual focus felt fractured, her thoughts often drifting back to Ethan's smile or the way he had looked at her as though she was the most captivating person in the room. A few weeks later, everything changed. Naomi had been feeling uncharacteristically tired and nauseous, dismissing it as the result of late nights and endless deadlines. But when her symptoms persisted, she reluctantly bought a pregnancy test. She stared at the positive result in disbelief, her hands trembling. Pregnant. The word felt surreal, almost too big to comprehend. A mixture of fear, excitement, and uncertainty washed over her. She placed a trembling hand on her stomach, her mind spinning with questions. What did this mean for her carefully constructed life? Could she do this alone? Her first thought was Ethan, but then the questions flooded in. How would he react? Would he even want to know? They had shared one extraordinary night, but they didn't exchange numbers or even last names. He was a stranger, after all. With no way to contact him, Naomi turned to her best friend Grace for advice. "This is insane," Naomi said, her voice shaky as she relayed the news. "I don't even know how to start handling this." Grace reached for her hand, her tone firm but supportive. "You don't have to figure it all out right now. Focus on what matters, you and the babies. Everything else will fall into place." Naomi nodded, unsure of how or when, but knowing her life was about to change forever. For 2 months, Ethan Blake had replayed the same memory in his mind. Naomi's laughter, the way her eyes lit up when they talked, and the magnetic pull that had drawn them together. He had woken up the morning after their shared night to find her gone, leaving nothing behind. Not a number, not a name, just the lingering scent of her perfume and a memory that refused to fade. Ethan, a man known for solving the unsolvable, found himself at a loss. Without even knowing her last name, all his efforts to track her down led nowhere. For someone used to having control, the situation left him frustrated and strangely hollow. Now, standing in the middle of the Innovate NYC Technology Conference, he felt like the universe had finally answered his unspoken question. Naomi Carter, her name boldly displayed on a plaque as the lead designer of the exhibit he'd been invited to see. She was here. Ethan's heart pounded as he scanned the room, his eyes locking on her figure adjusting a display. She hadn't seen him yet. He took a moment to take her in, the same grace, the same understated elegance. But something had changed. "Naomi?" he called softly, his voice cutting through the hum of the conference. Naomi froze at the sound of his voice, her pulse quickening as she turned. Her eyes widened in shock as she saw him, the man she had convinced herself she'd never see again. "Ethan," she said, her voice barely above a whisper. Ethan stepped closer, his expression a mix of relief and disbelief. "I've been looking for you," he said, his voice tinged with frustration. "I didn't even know where to start, but I couldn't stop thinking about you." Naomi's heart sank. She had hoped for time, for a way to prepare herself for this moment. "I didn't think we'd see each other again," she admitted, her voice trembling slightly. Ethan searched her face, picking up on her hesitation. "Is something wrong?" he asked, his voice softening. Naomi hesitated, then drew in a steadying breath. There was no easy way to say it. "I'm pregnant." The words hung in the air between them, heavy with meaning. Ethan blinked, his expression unreadable as he processed what she had just said. "Pregnant?" he repeated, his voice low. She nodded, her hands instinctively moving to her stomach. 2 months. Ethan let out a shaky breath, his gaze flickering between her and the tiny hint of a baby bump beneath her blouse. His chest tightened with a swirl of emotions, shock, disbelief, but most of all, an overwhelming sense of responsibility. "And it's..." "Yes," Naomi said quickly, meeting his eyes. "They're yours." Ethan's shoulders dropped as the tension melted into something deeper. Resolve. "Naomi, you should have told me," he said, his tone firm but not accusatory. "I didn't know how to find you," she said defensively, her voice wavering, "and I wasn't sure if you'd even want to know." "Of course I'd want to know," Ethan said, stepping closer. "This changes everything, but I'm not going anywhere. I want to be part of this, of their lives, of your life, if you'll let me." Naomi felt her walls begin to crack as his words washed over her. "I don't know what I need right now," she admitted, her voice shaky. "Then let's figure it out together," Ethan said, his tone unwavering, step by step. For the first time in months, Naomi felt a spark of hope. Ethan wasn't just showing up, he was staying. The weeks following their unexpected reunion were a whirlwind of adjustments for both Naomi and Ethan. The guarded walls Naomi had built around herself began to crack as Ethan eased his way into her life with quiet determination. True to his word, he didn't push her, but remained a steady presence, showing up for every prenatal appointment and making time despite his packed schedule. Naomi, however, struggled to find her footing. Balancing the demands of her career with the realities of pregnancy left her feeling stretched thin. The twins had brought a new joy into her life, but they also came with a wave of uncertainty she wasn't used to navigating. "You need to slow down," Grace said one evening, watching Naomi work late into the night on a design proposal. "You're carrying 2 lives, Naomi. Maybe it's time to let Ethan help." Naomi sighed, placing a protective hand over her stomach. "I'm not used to relying on anyone. I've always done things on my own." "And how's that working out for you now?" Grace's voice softened. "He's here, Naomi. Let him be." Ethan, for his part, seemed to sense Naomi's reluctance to lean on him. Instead of overwhelming her, he found subtle ways to support her. He began organizing her prenatal vitamins into a labeled dispenser, stocked her fridge with healthy meals, and even quietly took over handling the logistics of converting her spare bedroom into a nursery. One evening, Ethan arrived with a folded piece of paper and handed it to Naomi. She unfolded it to find a carefully sketched layout of a nursery. "You drew this?" she asked, surprised. "It's terrible, I know," Ethan said with a sheepish grin. "I'm not the artist here. But I figured you'd want to design it yourself, so I thought I'd give you a starting point." For the first time in weeks, Naomi laughed. "It's functional," she teased, "but it's a start." As the months passed, the two began to settle into an unspoken partnership. Naomi gradually opened up, sharing her fears about motherhood and her need to maintain her independence. Ethan listened without judgment, his presence unwavering. One night, after a particularly difficult day, Naomi found herself resting her head on Ethan's shoulder. "I didn't expect this," she admitted softly. "Neither did I," he said, wrapping an arm around her gently. "But I think we're figuring it out." Step by step, they were learning to trust not just each other, but the extraordinary path they were now walking together. The day came sooner than either of them expected. At just over 32 weeks, Naomi woke in the middle of the night to sharp pains rippling through her abdomen. Panic set in as she realized her water had broken. "Ethan!" she called out, her voice trembling. Within seconds, Ethan was at her side, his calm but urgent demeanor keeping her grounded. "It's okay, I've got you," he said, quickly grabbing the hospital bag they had packed just in case. The ride to the hospital was a blur of flashing lights and racing thoughts. Naomi clung to Ethan's hand, her usual composure giving way to fear. "It's too early," she whispered, tears streaming down her face. "They're not ready." "They're fighters," Ethan said firmly, his voice steady. "Just like their mom." At the hospital, the medical team moved swiftly. Naomi was rushed into a delivery room where the doctors confirmed she was in premature labor. Despite her fear, Naomi's instincts as a mother kicked in. She focused on her breathing, listening to the doctor's instructions, while Ethan stayed by her side, refusing to leave for even a moment. Hours later, the cries of their first baby filled the room, piercing through Naomi's exhaustion like a beacon of hope. Tears blurred her vision as she realized that this tiny sound marked the beginning of an entirely new chapter of her life. "It's a girl," the doctor announced, holding up the tiny, squirming newborn for just a moment before handing her off to the waiting NICU team. Naomi barely had time to process before the second baby arrived. A boy this time. His cry was softer but steady, a sound that filled Naomi's heart with relief. Ethan's eyes glistened as he squeezed Naomi's hand, "You did it," he whispered, his voice thick with emotion. Both babies were whisked away to incubators, each receiving the immediate care they needed to thrive. Naomi, exhausted but overwhelmed with love, leaned back against the hospital bed. "Luna and Theo," she murmured softly, the names they had decided on weeks ago finally spoken aloud. Ethan looked at her, his heart brimming with pride and gratitude. "Luna and Theo," he repeated, as if committing the names to memory. Hours later, as they visited the NICU together, Ethan placed a hand gently on Naomi's shoulder. Through the glass, they watched their tiny miracles, each fighting in their own way. "They're perfect," Naomi whispered. Ethan nodded, his voice full of reverence. "And so are you." Sunlight streamed through the glass walls of the botanical garden, casting a warm golden glow over the ceremony space. Delicate white roses and peonies adorned the arch where Naomi Carter and Ethan Blake were about to exchange vows. In the front row, nestled in their custom-made chinettes, two tiny bundles lay peacefully. Luna, with her delicate features and calm demeanor, rested quietly, while Theo, ever curious, waved his little hands as if conducting the string quartet playing in the background. Naomi stood in the bridal suite, adjusting the soft folds of her ivory dress. The gown, simple yet elegant, shimmered with subtle gold undertones that caught the light, a nod to the unconventional path that had brought her to this moment. "You look stunning," Grace whispered, her voice full of emotion as she adjusted Naomi's veil. Naomi's eyes shifted to the window, where she could see Ethan waiting at the altar. He looked as composed as always, his sharp suit perfectly tailored, but there was a softness to him now that hadn't been there before, a warmth that had grown through their shared journey. "Are you ready?" Grace asked. Naomi smiled, her hand instinctively moving to her necklace, which held two tiny charms shaped like stars, one for Luna, one for Theo. "More than I've ever been." The ceremony began with Naomi walking down the aisle, her heart swelling at the sight of Ethan's gaze fixed solely on her. In that moment, the world around them seemed to fade, leaving only the promise of a life they would build together. When she reached him, Ethan took her hands, his eyes shining with emotion. "You're breathtaking," he whispered. The officiant began, but their vows were what truly captivated the small, intimate gathering. "I promise to honor the love we've found in the most unexpected way, to cherish the strength we've built through every challenge, and to celebrate the miracles that brought us here," Ethan said, his voice steady yet full of feeling, "to stand by you, to protect Luna and Theo, and to cherish the life we've created together." Naomi smiled, her own voice steady despite the tears welling in her eyes. "I promise to be your partner in everything, raising our children, chasing our dreams, and finding joy in every moment we share." When they were pronounced husband and wife, the gathering erupted in cheers, but it was the soft laughter of their twins that truly marked the moment. Later that evening, as they danced under the twinkling lights of the garden, Ethan held Naomi close. "This is the beginning of everything," he said softly. Naomi leaned into him, her eyes drifting toward Luna and Theo. "And it's already perfect." As the celebration wound down, the soft glow of lanterns lit the botanical garden, casting an ethereal light over the evening. Ethan and Naomi sat side by side, watching Luna and Theo, who were now awake and gurgling happily in their bassinets. The twins were the center of their world, two tiny miracles who had brought an extraordinary depth of meaning to their lives. Naomi leaned her head on Ethan's shoulder, her wedding dress pooling gracefully around her. "It's strange, isn't it? How one unexpected night could lead to this," she said, her voice filled with quiet awe. Ethan smiled, his hand resting gently on hers. "I used to think I had everything figured out. My career, my plans, everything was on a timeline. Then you came along and rewrote everything I thought I knew about life." "And now?" Naomi asked, glancing up at him. "Now," Ethan said, his gaze fixed on Luna and Theo, "I can't imagine a life without you, or them. You're my future, Naomi, all three of you." Naomi felt tears prick her eyes as she looked at the man who had become so much more than she ever expected. "And you're ours." As the garden grew quieter and the last of their guests departed, Naomi and Ethan sat in peaceful silence, their hands intertwined. Nearby, Luna and Theo gurgled softly, their tiny hands reaching toward the stars above, as if already dreaming of the future their parents had promised to build together. The stars above seemed to echo the quiet symphony of their love, a story that had begun with a chance meeting but had grown into something extraordinary. "Together," Naomi whispered, her heart full. "Always," Ethan replied,